either the most interesting time in the history of InfoSec or the second most interesting after the arrival of the web.
Hello, welcome to Security, Cryptography, Whatever. I'm Deirdre.
I'm David.
I'm Thomas.
And
I'm Michael, yes.
Oh.
Sorry,
That's okay.
I messed it all up. I think...
This is the first time I think that's actually happened in almost 3 years.
Nice.
We have a very special guest today. You may know him from the internet as, oh my God, I say lcamtuf, but...
Yes, lcamtuf.
But you have like a real world human name, Michał Zalewski.
Oh my God!
I'm sorry. I know Irish and
we were
barely.
all hung up on the. We were all hung up on the first name.
Yeah,
I can't believe you were hung up on the second name.
That was absolutely terrible. Yes.
I'm sorry. Yes.
No, that's fine. The Polish pronunciation is Michał Zalewski, but I usually just go by Michael, and yeah.
Oh my God! I pronounced the W wrong. See, never mind. You're justified. I'm just as wrong as you are.
This is the most disappointing podcast I have ever done in my life.
We'll get so much worse.
Don't worry.
This is gonna get worse.
So worse.
Right.
So we thought right now was a good time to talk because of all of the AI vulnerability discovery stuff that's going on. And I feel as if we would have a very easy time finding people to talk to that were all lit up about AI vulnerability, like agent-based vulnerability discovery. I'm one of those people. But it's trickier to find somebody who is both skeptical, might be the wrong word, but like not on the exact same page as everybody else, and who also has your track record in the space, particularly, and I said this a little bit earlier, like 90% of what I talk about here is just me exercising demons from Hacker News. And like one of my continual irritants on Hacker News is that anytime a story from one of the frontier labs comes up, like 3 people always say, fuzzers did all this stuff already. And like, the problem is that Google isn't running fuzzers or Apple isn't running fuzzers or whatever.
Yeah.
And so you're the author of American Fuzzy Lab, AFL, which is like the de facto standard tool in that space. So I kind of wanted to get like your perspective, not right away on the AI stuff, but just basically on the trajectory of how we've been doing, automated vulnerability assessment, let's call it.
So that is a very open-ended question. I think,
Yep.
Like most of vulnerability research is being done automatically, and it's been like that for a long time, right? If you look at the browser space, I would wager that 80 or 90% of what's actually found and fixed is a product of automated tools. At the same time, even though it is automated, you can have dramatic sort of, step improvements or sort of, like revolutionary shifts in the tooling that we are using. And I think LLMs do represent such a shift. So I'm not going to take the contrarian position of, all of this sucks and it's the same as fuzzing and, time is a flat circle. But at the same time, I do have fairly, complex thoughts about the impact of the AI angle specifically, and I can sort of, get into that now, or we can, get there more gradually. But yeah, sort of, to directly answer your question, I think this is a very interesting time to be in. I think we are seeing a very fundamental shift. The technology is real, it's amazing, and you should be using it as a part of your workflow. I think that's the bottom line.
Yeah. So I think the first thing I want to I have like my own personal experience using like, kind of fuzzer arrangements of various kinds to do projects, but I've never done the at scale work that Google did in like the 2010s. So like large farms full of things doing, profile guided, AFL coverage and all that. Right. So I have a mental model of like fuzzers as tools of they're like literally things that I would build as like shop tools to get individual projects done. But like one of the worries I always have when people say like fuzzers did all this stuff is like my advanced fuzzer knowledge is not all that up to date. I understand exactly what the tools are doing, but like the difference between that and actually finding vulnerabilities with them, like actually having the field experience with them and seeing where like the sharp edges are, or where they're really, really effective or whatever. I feel like I have less real world experience. So if I said that, like, I think the way I want to get into this is just to like make a claim that is probably going to be wrong, but I'll make it anyways, just so that you can tell me I'm wrong, right? My like experience of this is that fuzzers are a really good way of getting a pile of variably quantified or variably qualified crashes in programs, right? And that like people that run large scale fuzzing, quickly get adept at building mountains and mountains of crashes. And in those crashes, I think there's like a general understanding that there are vulnerabilities, but the work is going from that pile of crashes to actual vulnerabilities. And if you're not doing that work, you're not actually solving the problem.
Yeah, I think, a large portion of running fuzzers at a scale and actually getting vulnerabilities fixed is the automation around the actual sort of, permutation engine, right? Like it's how you get projects on board in the first place. That's a major bottleneck for open source. And I think, quite often you have to do it yourself. And then it's gated on the available capacity of software engineers to actually instrument code, plug it in the right place, make sure that the right functionality is being exercised. And then the really difficult part is, crashes are often good enough. Like I think open source developers don't necessarily need an exploit. They don't need a very detailed write-up, but they want a repeatable crash, and you need to bring it to them using the workflow that they prefer, in a fashion that works for them. Some of them have their own, pet peeves and sort of, complex ideologies that you have to work with to actually make sure that things get fixed. So I think it was always a bottleneck for fuzzing. Not all of this goes away with agents. I think interactions with open source developers continue to be a very challenging touch point that you can't really automate with an LLM and expect good results, right?
Right.
But yeah, I think I think the way I've been describing this, and that goes way beyond vulnerability research, is that most of security problems really boil down to text comprehension at a scale, with emphasis on scale, right? Like we never have enough resources to actually look at every event generated by an enterprise, detection pipeline, or to sort of look at every line of code that's being written. And I think LLMs really profoundly changed the game on a number of fronts, right?
Yeah.
So
let me try really quickly, just like, two things, right? First of all, cards on the table. My interest in all of this stuff is like almost purely on the capability side, right? Like what vulnerabilities are we finding is a much more interesting question to me than how this works as an engineering process, right? Like how we solve the open source metabolizing these things, all that stuff. Those are really important and valid problems that I have passing interest in, right? But like I'm really focused on like the raw capability side of it, right? And then like with respect to how fuzzers kind of have traditionally worked, I had like a radicalizing moment a couple of years ago, like maybe a year and a half ago, where like an engineer in our team, Salim, who is amazing, like once a week he was finding game over vulnerabilities in our platform and like resolving them. And one of them was this wasn't a game over vulnerability, but it was a really good concern that we hadn't thought about. We run farms of virtual machines for our customers, multi-tenant on the same hardware. Yeah. And in some corner of our system, we were doing file system maintenance for VMs on the host side. So like we do like file system repair before backup or something like that. It was like whatever the current equivalent of fdisk is or whatever. But we'd run that on the host side. He's like, well, the file system obviously is controlled on the guest side. So that, now you're exposed to the entire kernel surface for whatever this file system is. That's a really good find. We solved that pretty quickly. But like, we're trying to figure out how big of a deal it was. He's like, I'm just going to go to syscaller and find crashers and run them through it. And like, there were crashers for it. Like he was immediately able to repro, I don't, you can't call it a memory corruption vulnerability just because it panics or whatever. But like, things where if we had found them ourselves, we would have gone and investigated them. And like, I have now this perception that there is just a mountain of Syscaller things that are just sitting there, and like somebody should triage them, I guess. Yeah. But like, are they vulnerabilities or are they not vulnerabilities? I don't know. We're in a state of uncertainty about them, right?
No, so I think that's like a fundamental change, right? And again, it doesn't matter as much as people sometimes claim, but I think it does matter, especially if you have like, Heisenbergs that you don't really, you can't immediately decide what's causing this. It doesn't reproduce consistently. It happens in a weird place that may be, miles away from the original fault. So look, like, again, in terms of technical capability and how it changes the game for InfoSec, I'm not actually a contrarian at all, right? My contrarian position lies somewhere else, and it has more to do with how we as an industry think about vulnerability research in the first place, right?
Yeah. I should say, like, I'm saying that my interest is in XYZ, but like I don't speak for David, you, or Deirdre. I think I'm a weirdo in this one thing, right? Like I find vulnerability research really very motivating as a reason to learn pretty much everything I've learned about technology and math. But that's just me, right? Like I think you're right to like call out the industry. You just said something interesting that I've heard you say before, which is just like how the industry kind of looks at vulnerability research. And you've said in other places, like, I get the impression that you generally feel like we way overvalue vulnerability research as an intrinsic good.
Yeah, so, maybe let me answer that in the form of a rant. And I'm going to get to like a very precise AI related point on the line. But I generally have come to, detest InfoSec punditry on some level, because I think we consistently get fixated on things that are not really representative of what actually matters day to day. And you mentioned Hacker News, and I actually checked Hacker News today, and there was someone talking about how InfoSec information security has already ceased to exist as a field as a consequence of AI vulnerability discovery. And I think
that was not me, for the record.
Let me call my boss real quick and let her know the field doesn't exist anymore.
So, and it's not just that. I think, when you think about what arguably changed enterprise security the most in the past 15 years, it's not the stuff that people present at Black Hat or that we, sell at our RSA. It was the one thing that we all love here, I think, Bitcoin, right? It used to be that ransomware was this niche thing that basically was constrained by how much money you could move through Western Union, which was not a lot, right? And now it's this like global economic powerhouse that funds hostile regimes and really is the one thing that keeps most CISOs up at night. And, post-quantum cryptography doesn't. I'm sorry to say that, right?
I know.
And so in my mind, the discourse around AI vulnerability discovery kind of fits that mold, although not in the way that many people claim. Many folks think that the technology itself is hype and it isn't, right? Like, again, it's real, it's impressive, and you should be using it. And again, as I mentioned, right, I think most of security is text comprehension at a scale. And now we have and we were really severely constrained by scale. And now we have a tool that largely removes that constraint. And that's amazing, that's transformative, and it's absolutely going to change the practice of InfoSec. But to get to my actual point, I think, our industry has long overstated the practical importance of vulnerability research. And I think it's partially because it's sort of, our origin story. And then it's a part of our collective identity. It's how we can, it's what we can bring up to show how clever we are and why we need to be paid more than everyone else. And it has cool ties to spycraft and all the other things. But fundamentally, like, 0 days were generally not how enterprises get popped, and having 5 times as many 0 days or 50% less doesn't really change the nature of the game. And part of it is, sort of physical constraints too, right? Like, the technology is not magic. It doesn't give you an endless supply of, 0 days in OpenSSH, for example. it gives you some respectable numbers of new findings in software that was already kind of busted and had exploitable bugs every year.
Yeah.
And you know, and that you probably have somewhere in your enterprise in a version that's 5 years behind, right? So we were always kind of operating in that reality, and we have far more basic problems that we can't quite solve or couldn't, you know, inventory patching, human behavior, that are adding up to a much larger and less tractable attack surface that actually keeps biting us in the back over and over again. And this is actually where LLMs are absolutely amazing and are gonna change because like all of a sudden you can actually reason about every single thing that's happening within your enterprise, quite possibly, right? And you can take action on that. And on the offense side, it's kind of, you know, the same thing that like the attackers can now afford to pull on every single door handle within your enterprise. Yeah. And they can do that more quickly, and they don't have to care. Like, you know, if you're using an agent, you have to worry about it deleting your production database. They don't, right? Like, if it messes up, well, that's a shame, but that was your data, not theirs, right? So I like, again, I think there's a lot of interesting wake-up calls for security and things we need to reckon with and things we need to start building. But like, you know, the vulnerability research side is amazing, and it's, you know, on some level, it is depressing to me that, you know, this is the one thing that I always enjoyed. And, you know, same as Thomas, right? Like, it really motivated me to learn. And now, you know, there's a computer that can do it better, the same or better, and you know, for a lot less. But yeah, so that's sort of, you know, the genesis of my skepticism here, right? I think the AI apocalypse in the industry, or the day of reckoning, is coming, but it's probably not the, you know, Vulnpocalypse, right, angle specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to... David, you go, sorry.
I mostly agree with you. The way that I would put it is that it seems like zero-day exploitation is currently, or let's say pre-AI, was not supply constrained at all. It was demand constrained. Because like, for the most part, society works in the sense that it is like not a good career option for anyone on this call to decide to like go into exploitation. And if they do, like actual like computer exploitation, not like vulnerability research. And if they do, like you said, they're probably just gonna go after unpatched things anyway. It's not clear that increasing the number of available 0 days results in more like actual operationalized exploits.
Yeah, to be clear,
and it seems like it won't.
I think, you know, that there are quantitative differences, right? Like, I think it lowers the bar, right? And sort of, you know, there's going to be like, I think, you know, it's going to alter the market dynamics, right? Like, if you want to buy a 0 day, maybe you're going to be able to buy it for less. But that's kind of, you know,
may have the Jevons paradox.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, qualitative versus quantitative, I think, is the distinction I see, right?
Yeah. So I think there is like a risk that like the people in like, let's say, Southeast Asia, not to rag on them, that are currently running like tech support scams, may find that it is now economical to run subset of like AI-driven exploitation things on some subset of users. But I suspect that would look different, kind of in the same way that like pirating music got replaced with like listening to Spotify versus like everyone just started paying 99 cents a song.
I think I'm like the resident vulnerability research and AI maximalist in this conversation, right? And I do think that the emphasis on you know, the first tier targets like Chrome and iOS and all that, right? I do feel like that's mostly a competitive thing, if that's the right way to put it. It's mostly kind of like it's tournament logic, right? It doesn't have that much to do with making things more secure. I feel like when we talked to Mark Dowd about like the markets and vulnerability research, I didn't come away from that with the sense that like they were lacking for possible vulnerability avenues to chase down. And like there's a persistent logic that, you know, state level actors or whatever are stockpiling vulnerabilities, which turns out not to be true. Like it's a software product like every other software product, and they're literally more concerned about paying maintenance costs for vulnerabilities and exploit kits than they are with, like, you know, having 15 different backup vulnerabilities. So I think you could look at the situation and say, okay, the fact that it's going to get cheaper to find Chrome vulnerabilities, like a Chrome drive-by or whatever, and that won't change that much because everybody that you cared about having Chrome drive-bys already had them.
Exactly.
Or at
Like
least
there's
had
already a market that makes that work.
already
And-
had
and
the ones
early-
they really needed and no more. Yeah.
And I think there's
An early Uber investor a few weeks ago was saying, "Oh, I don't know why we didn't give Mythos like to the U.S. government and then use it to hack China like before announcing it." And it's like, well, that's because that's not how any of this works. Like, we're not short. The reason that like the U.S. military can or cannot get into something in China has nothing to do with like a shortage of exploits.
The other reason why I'm kind of skeptical about the vulnerability situation specifically is that I think there's like inherent symmetry to it, right? Like any tool that the bad guy can use, the good guys can use exactly the same way, right? So if Chrome or, you know, Microsoft or whoever, Apple want to sort of, you know, match the increase in the availability of 0 days, you know, they have a simple lever to pull and they can sort of, you know, get where they want to be to restore the previous equilibrium, right? Or even go beyond. I think there are many other areas in security where that symmetry doesn't hold, right? Like the example I mentioned, like, you know, the defense versus offense on the enterprise side has this asymmetry baked in. It's a lot easier to crank out hyper-targeted spear phishing emails to exec than to detect and stop them reliably, right? Even with AI. And so I think that's where the AI gives the bad guys a lot more advantage that is more difficult to counter, right? Versus just, you know, we were fuzzing Chrome before, now we're also gonna, you know, throw some LLMs at it, right? And that's kind of, you know, the eternal struggle between good and evil, right?
Right.
It changes things operationally a lot for all the reasons that like Thomas doesn't care about, which are, I think, the ones that are interesting to me. And so like you have a question even like right now. I've had people come to me at Chrome who like work on other parts of Chrome and are basically like, aren't we just drastically over investing in basically like anti-exploitation things? And if you look at it like by the numbers, right, there's like not that many people whose Chromes get popped every year. So in some sense, we are. On the other hand, like what we're really doing is like we're winning, sort of, for some definition of winning. And like if we stopped doing all of this, it will go back and it would look like the early 2000s or the late 90s again. And so we just kind of have to do all this work to run in place, sort of. And then like what like AI bug finding has done has, I think, in many ways, like just validated things that a bunch of security people already knew, like for platforms, basically. Like, let's ignore the open source projects, which is like not interesting. I agree. I agree with everyone else that
Not
I don't
including
really care
Chromium. How about?
about like small open source projects. And instead, like, let's just talk about like things that previously were targets for exploitation, which is like client-side platforms like browsers.
Yeah, let's not talk about stuff like XZ, right? Like, who cares about that?
I mean, in practice, like I would quote Hermione, and say, you know, when that turns out when that happens, we're pretty good at catching it. But like the deluge of AI bugs has magnified all of the things that were already stupid about bug bounties, which was that like a bug bounty is like the worst possible way to prioritize security work because it's entirely interrupt driven. And so instead what you have is you have just deluge of bugs that were basically validating everything the security people said, which was like your code's full of memory safety vulnerabilities and these are the areas that are the worst. And then people are like, oh, you know, I don't know, like, and security people are bad at their jobs at getting people to change anyway. And so all these bugs show up, and then you have this operational question of like, how do we deal with that? And you have to deal with it even though the like impact of increased exploitation might not be that bad, because eventually, like if we just chose to not deal with it, we'd be back in the 2000s again, and we don't want that. So you have to figure out how to deal with it. And like, yeah, you get the AI tools to help you deal with the problems that the AI solved. But again, I think it is a little bit harder for defenders because like if you're an engineering team, you need to like make sure this stuff is repeatable and can either run on every commit, or you have like a consistent way of using a harness to find bugs and patch them and prevent them from coming back. Whereas if you're like selling exploits, even if you're operationalizing it, what you need is a fuzzer you can run for a few months that pops out a big enough backlog. And then a couple months later, you need to be able to do that again. I haven't actually worked for an offensive firm, so I don't know that for sure. But there's a difference between finding a lot of bugs once and then like actually solving a problem. And again, the people working on the platforms actually have to solve the problems again. And that just always sucks because you're, doing.
Yeah, but I think, like with browsers in particular, I think, the implicit assumption is that given the developer velocity, the choice of languages and the features that are sort of, being shipped every year, we are implicitly accepting a certain baseline of security failures, right? So like we are not aiming for a state of having zero vulnerabilities because that would be insane. And also, and so you want to lower the base rate, you want to run the same tools that the bad guys are running at the same or larger scale to make their lives harder, but ultimately more hinges not on the inability to find another bug in, WebGL or whatever, but on mitigations, right? Like holding up and making it really difficult to reliably exploit. And sort of, bringing the cost up, right? Like most of the mitigations you can eventually bypass if you get lucky, if you chain together, 5 or 10 bugs. But a large portion of why 0 days have gotten so expensive is because you need to do all that legwork that wasn't necessarily essential before, right? And I think
I disagree with that a little bit in the sense that like as enough mitigations like do actually have an impact on attackers, but unless you can like affirmatively say like a given bug that comes into your queue like doesn't matter at this line of code, ideally by like inspecting the line of code, being like, oh, this uses a span, so I know it's not an out of bounds read unless the span is constructed wrong, or it uses raw putter, miracle pointer, and Chrome, so we know the use after free doesn't matter.
Oh no,
if you have something where like, oh, maybe it's just a write and not a read, you still have to treat it like it's bad.
Yeah, I was talking
and then
about,
it comes through your whole process as an engineer.
Yeah, I was talking about the offense side, right? Like I think on the defense side,
but you can't discern.
Yeah.
The problem is the defender can't discern which ones were useful and which ones were not, and so you have to treat them all the same. Yeah. And so if you just apply mitigations, even if you are actively hurting the ability to actually exploit Chrome, like you're not solving your problem of you have this massive interrupt queue of security issues, which eventually like you're just going to stop looking at.
Yeah, we're basically doing two things that are not solving the problem, but which is trying to enumerate all the bugs. But yeah.
So there's like an implicit assumption here in this conversation that like the vulnerabilities that agents might find, and we can get into like more of why we think agents might or might not find different kinds of vulnerabilities, but like the vulnerabilities they're going to find are going to be of the same kind of, they're going to rhyme with all the vulnerabilities that we've seen so far. And like we're accepting a certain amount annually or every month or whatever of memory corruption vulnerabilities and client-side software or whatever it is, right? And so like I think we feel like we have a decent bead on where things are going. And like I do feel like we've kind of like organizationally and as kind of an industry, we've metabolized a certain level of dealing with vulnerabilities, right? Like the sky doesn't fall every time a new vulnerability comes out. You're much more likely to get popped with phishing or by a dumb misconfiguration in an S3 bucket or something like that. Like fully agree on that, right? And like LLMs apply to that stuff the same way they apply to everything else, which is super interesting. But I want to push back on the idea that like what agents are going to do is, get us to peak oil on memory corruption vulnerabilities or something like that, right? Like there were moments in the past when we as practitioners, like we were practicing when SQL injection, broke out, right? And there's like a before or after moment that was probably the span of like just a couple of months where like Before, there were a bunch of things that were hard to break into, and after, like, for a while, everything was trivial. The first commercial pen test I ever did was like it was an application where I logged in with quote or quote equals quote, which is literally the first SQL injection I ever attempted, and it worked, which totally ruined me for vulnerability research ever after that, because I'd always think that would work, and it almost like you never get blatant SQL injection vulnerabilities like that. But I did in that one instance and thought they were that common. But like, so like when we discovered SQL, when we first published Stack Overflows, right? There's a clear before and after to enablement for Stack Overflow vulnerabilities. Before, lots of software was, you know, resilient enough, and then after, the entire internet was vulnerable. And in those moments, it's really material, the vulnerabilities that you're finding, right? In those moments, it actually really matters a lot that there are all these new it becomes the dominant vector that things get popped with until you kind of figure that out. And I'm not as certain as I think the implicit assumptions in this conversation are that we're not going to see more things like that. So, you know, side channel attacks are a good example of where there's like lots of kind of intellectually understood vulnerabilities that we don't viscerally feel and we don't deal with because there isn't enough elite attention to develop them into real vulnerabilities. How certain are the three of you that like all Go memory race vulnerabilities are not going to really be practically exploitable?
So I think you're sort of, you know, inching toward this sort of, you know, AGI question here, maybe, right?
Is that AGI? It's like
An AGI.
is a memory race
declare
exploitable
AGI
an
once you
indication
can
of AGI?
Go exploiting a Go race condition. AGI confirmed.
Right. Yeah. No, I think, you know, to some extent, you know, all that I have seen so far is that LLMs are very good at scaling the methods that we've been using in the past and finding the problems that we've been finding in the past. Now, I think, you know, there's also like less numerous data points from other fields that they are actually so good at combining and synthesizing information from the sort of, you know, training corpus that they arrive at completely new conclusions, completely new findings, like, you know, like fundamentally new math, right, and so on. And I you know, like, I think you're asking about unknown unknowns, right? Like, there is a future where it actually turns out that there's an you know, nearly inexhaustible supply of 0 days in OpenSSH in places we were not even thinking about. But I have no way to prove or disprove that, and I don't think.
Hold on. In fairness, I want to say I actually don't think we're going to get like a bottomless supply of OpenSSH vulnerabilities. I have like despite it being an old school C code base, I have a very high opinion of the OpenSSH code base, right? I'm actually thinking of things where it's like, I have a nagging suspicion that there are already things there. And to me, it's not as much about advancing LLM like frontier model capabilities, although that's a factor. It's not as much that as it is the new abundance we have of elite attention, right? Where like, it doesn't take that much time for me to set up the conditions to like do, you know, a side channel testing harness across the internet or something like that. Where like, I'd have to do a whole lot of studying and research and like trial and error to get that, like those harnesses set up for myself to do that kind of testing. And now I can just dispatch it and have it done. So I feel like the really high end vulnerability research has been for the past 20 years done by like a reasonably large number of people, but it's still an elite in the industry. And I don't like that, right? Like, I think that's always been kind of bullshit. And like, one of my big things is just, I don't think that the people doing this work on the high end are really, in any fundamental sense, more gifted or capable than any other engineer. They just, they've been inducted into the field and they get to do that work, right? And like, I think the bottom has fallen out of that, right? And so now, if you imagine 100 times more people being able to do that work because it's no longer as time consuming, I think a lot more things get kind of proved out.
Not even time consuming, but like like where do you even get the knowledge to start the thing that requires, like, that also requires time, but it requires some sort of like entry point of like, how do I even get started on this path? And now you don't even have to know anything. You just like go look for vulns in place. Like, here's your guide, start here, enter here, and it will find something more likely than not. If there is a vuln there, well, you know, maybe it'll hallucinate something that's not really there, but then you can write a test that'll it'll ask it to write a test to be like, confirm that this is broken. So it's not even just the time amplifier, but like there's a lot of stuff that you used to have to be able to know what to ask or know where to start or know how to approach a thing, that you basically have a very powerful shortcut on.
I would say this. I think that a lot of money and compute has been thrown at this problem by the frontier labs over the past couple of weeks or months. And we're going to start seeing a trickle or a flood. I mean, we have already started seeing some of the sort of, public results from that. My understanding of, what I've seen so far and what I can talk about is that they are not fundamentally different from, again, the kind of vulnerabilities, the kinds of targets, the kinds of attack surfaces that we've been seeing before. So I think, that doesn't disprove your theory, but I think it would hinge, I think we would depend on some, additional breakthroughs before we get to this point where you can point GPT 5.5 or Mythos or whatever at Chrome and come up with completely new classes of vulnerabilities, or raise conditions of the kind that we thought are not exploitable in the past. I think it's possible, like it happened before.
But that's not what I think, right? Like, so there's the big thing with Mythos has always been Nicholas Carlini being able to aim those frontier models at a piece of software and just say, give me a 0-day exploit, right? And those words put together and getting real output from that was like a huge thing. That's a real thing, right? But like, I'm not coming from a place of, pointing, a frontier model at a code base and saying, come up with an entirely new bug class. Like, it's just going to figure that out. I'm more coming from like, do you really not have nagging suspicions? So first of all, this might just be me, right? It might just be because I learned all the computer science I learned by reading exploits. Right. But like, it's like all I think about is what the new bug classes are going to be. Like Spectre, like that was amazing for me, right? Like things like that, like that's the punctuation for this whole kind of career that I have. But it's kind of like, it's like I'm always thinking about like what other like what weird things could turn out to be entire bug classes. But do you not have anything like that? Do you not think that way? Are you not a vulnerability researcher?
I have a lot of things, like, there's a lot of places, there's a lot of rocks that I think we have not peeked under. And I think LLMs are gonna, like, in the embedded world, which is, something I'm spending a lot of time with as a hobby, there's a lot of absolutely terrible things that are absolutely everywhere right now. And I'm not talking, like a crappy HTTP stack. On a more fundamental level, right? Like, the radios and
RF. Yeah.
And I think this is, but at the same time, so I think, we're going to unlock a lot of interesting things. Is that like a fundamentally qualitative change versus, some researcher deciding, oh, actually, I'm going to throw a fuzzer at this hardware as it happened many times in the past. And what is the actual, like, Spectre, again, like a fascinating class of bugs.
I know what you're going to say.
Does it, like,
I know
so what?
Say.
Like, I absolutely loved it, every bit of it. And, the insane amount of resources we spent
but
on
we
fixing
agree.
it.
We probably
the foundation
agree.
of the trusted compute base. It's a lot of things that kind of we worry about in cryptography is like this is highly difficult to exploit in a lot of cases, but it's the foundation of trust in almost everything that we build on top of it.
I know.
Fundamentally, the impact of Spectre was simply to make all of our computers slower. I understand this, right? But
it could have been a lot worse. It could have been a lot worse.
but you can't say that about SQL injection. Fundamentally, the popularization of SQL injection materially changed the susceptibility of networks to attack, right? Spectre didn't do that. SQL injection did do that. SSRF, more recent example, right?
Yeah, you also have tools to eradicate it more quickly now. So I think there is symmetry, right? We get, like, we've been through those cycles before, many times before, and both on the sort of, like the uptake or the sort of, uphill portion of it when, someone discovers XSS and it turns out that you can do absolutely terrible things with it, including, running code on your device because we moved everything to the web. right? Including control over endpoints. And then sort of, we've seen people actually make progress making those classes of issues go away, right? Like, like if you want to find an XSS on google.com, you're going to have a hard time, right? Because of the investments that the company has made into getting rid of entire class of engineering
into
paradigms,
safe coding,
right?
specifically.
Right. Yeah.
Like again, not mitigations, like
right.
safe coding, stop the bug at the source.
So I think, like if you're asking me if security is going to be interesting for the next couple of years, absolutely. And vulnerability research is going to be interesting, and a lot of other, attack and defense related aspects of it are going to be fun as well. But again, like, and I guess, it's a question of where we draw the line between apocalypse and business as usual, right? And maybe we are just defining it a bit differently.
I didn't come up with bug-pocalypse or whatever it is. I don't think there's any apocalypses coming, right? We'll figure it. I think the RF thing is like such a good example, just because of so many times I had the experience of being on projects where there was an RF target, and like we'd go in and like everyone wanted to like get good at GNU radio or whatever people were using, like SDRs and all that, right? And like by your second project, you just knew going into that, like, no, you're not going to do anything with an SDR for this RF target. You have no idea how complicated it is to actually get a protocol up and running like that, right? Inevitably, you're just going to do the hardware hacking to find like the serial bus that you can like turn this thing into a modem for its own protocol. That might not be true anymore though, right? Like now, like that seems like a reasonable task to stick an LLM on, because it's got like in the training set there is all the RF knowledge. It's just like none of us are electrical engineers, so we were never trained to do that stuff. But like the model's an electrical engineer, is every kind of engineer. I just think I know, I get what you're saying. Like even like widespread RF attacks probably wouldn't, I don't know, maybe it'd be more destabilizing than Spectre, but like
no, like you could probably build some cool worm, right? And like but again, we've done that. We've been there.
What's a
right?
worm? We've seen worms.
The apocalypse isn't going to be on users. The like, let's classify projects into like 3 shapes. There's like some stuff like OpenSSH and boring SSL that pretty much doesn't have bugs.
What did you
the
say?
AIs
OpenSSL?
have
Inshallah,
boring
no,
SSL
boring
specifically.
SSL.
boring SSL,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
has
okay.
had the AIs pointed at it, and they have not found any high severity memory issues, whereas they have found many in other SSLs.
Yeah.
And like OpenSSH, like there's like 3 people in the world that can write like safe C code, like the WireGuard Jason is one of them. But so there's some projects that like we've actually managed to make safe. There's another set of projects that just like don't actually matter that much. And then there's the like set of projects that are like actually juicy exploit targets. And I think we're all loosely in agreement that those will not, that like we're not really expecting a ton more exploitation. Like maybe it's a risk, like we'll see what happens with the market dynamics. But the apocalypse there is on the engineering teams of those products, because you have more and more bugs than ever, and there's not a good way to prioritize like how you handle this.
Yes.
Yeah.
You need to be taking the set of bugs and turning it into like a queue of actually preventative actions and not just mitigations, because you need preventative actions to like save the time of the actual engineering teams. And if you just choose to say, well, exploitation was already like demand bound, not supply bound, so it doesn't matter. Like doing nothing will result in the Jevons paradox and like bad things happening. So you have to do something. And so the apocalypse is just like, you have this massive queue of interrupt work that is saying like, you got 20 million lines of C++ in Chrome. Well, not all of them are going to be winners, right?
Yeah.
And if it's 1 bug per like 1,000 lines, that's, like 20,000 high severity bugs. And if an AI finds 10 a day, well, I'll see you in like 3 to 10 years.
Yeah. And that's not even including like, up the past couple of months, couple of years, like there's been sloppy reports to bug bounty programs and bug trackers and stuff like that. And like you can get rid of a lot of the crap reports. It's laborious, but you can do it. Now the reports are just very, very good. And a lot of them are not slop. And that is like when they're all very good and they're all high, like you have to deal with that too.
Yeah.
Can I just take a minute here? another Hacker News thing just blew up in my brain. I'm sorry. I'm having a message board stroke. Okay.
Oh my
but
God.
Can we talk for a second
You
about
need like Hacker News statins or something.
What's going on? What are we doing?
Can we talk for a second here about the idea that curl is the benchmark for how effective a vulnerability tool is?
Fuck. Why?
This is This is entirely. I'm waiting for any of the three of you to tell me that I'm wrong and that curl is deceptively difficult software to build, and that you wouldn't expect it to work properly. Because all I hear is like Mythos didn't find awesome things. Like they did a Mythos scan on curl and it didn't find any new curl 0 days. It's like you could do a Mythos scan on cat, and I wouldn't think that cat would have 0 day vulnerabilities either.
It's a little bit more complicated than cat, but it's not OpenBSD, so I wouldn't expect it to be that juicy.
Well,
You shut your mouth.
I also, like we like, I think there's also the risk of like, I had the opposite of this conversation with many folks many years ago before AI, that like in the context of some of the mitigations we've and sort of defenses and practices we've been developing at Google, that all of this is cool, but it works for like this one company in the world that is sort of has a code base of a sufficient complexity and a sufficient amount of funding and so on, and everyone is sort of struggling with more basic problems, right? So I think curl is actually representative of a lot of what's out there, right? Like it's actually a pretty good baseline for a code base that isn't terrible. It's not like it's not FFmpeg. Right, like you can't throw a fuzzer at it and have like $50 in an hour, but it's also not like some like very simple trivial library that is not gonna have bugs. So I think
curl matters a lot. I think curl matters. I just don't think it's a complexity benchmark.
Yeah, I think there are people making arguments both ways that this is like like basically if someone tells you that whatever outcome with curl, good or bad, is proof of anything, then they are probably full of it. But
I feel bad putting this to you because I feel like fundamentally the subtext of what you're saying is like we're way over indexed on vulnerability discovery and response in general, right? And like we can go different angles on that. We can talk about backup software. We can talk about the oddball stuff that I'm worried about getting, popped right now that like isn't Chrome or whatever, right? But like more generally, I wonder, like one big problem that we have is it's really easy to imagine, next week, like Mythos 2 is going to find a reliable KVM exploit, right? Like something that broadly impacts everybody. And like, I'm going to have to reboot every single, server in our fleet. And that's a lot of hardware to reboot. It would take us we've tabletoped this. It's doable, but like it's rough.
Like the vuln wouldn't be anything. I think we're speculating the vuln wouldn't be anything like completely alien that no one's ever seen before. It's just threading pieces together in a way that because it holds all this context in its head, quote head, it's able to thread them together and find an exploit.
Well, hold on. Forget LLMs finding this. Imagine, just Tavis Ormandy publishes this next week.
Of course.
Which he has done to us before.
He took a shower and then,
I've like gotten lunch and come back and like Zen bleed is happening, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. Put aside how I admire him. He's amazing. I'm not dunking on him. But that did happen. That did happen to me. My thing here now is on the defender side, right? Like another thing that agents potentially do for me is put me in a situation where I don't necessarily have to reboot to do that, right? Like it's much more plausible now that I could do a dynamic kernel patch than before.
Yeah, but that's kind of one of the places where you do have that asymmetry, right? Like to find vulnerabilities, you're perfectly happy with a 50% accuracy rate. Like if 50% of the findings or 90% of the findings, that would be just like absolutely wonderful. You will not accept 90% accuracy for binary patching in production, right? So I think the solution is a lot more challenging than the.
You're 2 steps past where I'm at, right? Just assume we're in a situation where like we've identified the vulnerability. There is an official source level fix for it that's the right fix and all that. And I have the simple logistical problem of how the hell do I actually apply this patch, given I'm going to have to reboot, tens of thousands of physical machines or whatever.
How do you
right?
deploy
And,
the
like,
fix? Not
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Like I'm thinking more just in line of like we have a known good fix for it, and like I can imagine that in most cases, even in many cases, I'd be able to dynamically, given a known good patch, dynamically apply that.
In the
And I wouldn't be worried
business
that
operation sense, not in the like software library. Like I just have to release a
Yeah.
security fix version and blast it out to all official channels, etc.
No, by apply you mean hot patch your live running
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
installs without rebooting.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you have
And I'm not,
confidence that the solution is right, and you just need like a monkey with a wrench to
Well,
log
Yeah,
in.
but I mean, I
and-
think a lot of things don't get fixed just because it's very difficult to schedule reboots
Right.
and take the outage hit.
yes. Or in this case, take the risk of an outage. You might have a lot of confidence that you can live patch this, but that's still risky.
If you can get to that point, yeah, and then like you still have the problem that if the agent goes to Reddit and decides to ransomware you instead, but like that can be mitigated, right? Like with sandboxing, and it's all probabilistic. But I think we have to get used to the notion that, I mean, it was always probabilistic, but like humans are probabilistic too, although in a different way and maybe a bit more predictable. And we need to build better models of how to deal with the unpredictability of agents every now and then. But yeah. No, like, I don't think you're crazy. So
A nice thing though with software is that you can do all this other stuff outside that the model isn't touching, and you can try to get something that's a lot more deterministic to try to like confirm, so that it'll spit something out and you can have pretty good confidence in what it will do behaviorally because you did all this other work to like test
Yeah.
it up the wazoo yourself and try to basically mitigate the probabilistic trust that you
My-
have.
yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's fine. Yeah.
I have this theory that if we're thinking about using agents in like mission critical settings like enterprises and so on, the principle, the way to build those architectures is not to put agents with human-like autonomy and human-like access and hope for them to always make the right decisions. It's to give them tools that are sort of, secure by default, provide them with more constrained permissions and more constrained access that is tailored to the differences between those like, they are fundamentally different. Like you can't put them in prison, right? Like if they delete your data, they can write you an apology letter, but that's kind of that's kind of as far as it goes. So there's the usual social contract you have with your employees is gone. And all the negative consequences that come with that. So I think, there are architectures that are conducive to building secure agentic platforms today, and we should be leaning into that more in the future. But I don't think this is the direction that the frontier labs are moving in, which is basically human-like agents that are, your coworkers, your assistants, and basically have unconstrained access to everything that you have, and that act with full human-like autonomy, right? And I think that is, I may be wrong about this, but I just don't, until we solve prompt injection and all the other problems that we don't seem to be making as much progress on as on capabilities themselves, I don't know.
I do get squicked out. Like I see a lot of places where LLMs are super applicable to defense. But I do get squicked out every time I see somebody using an LLM as a reference monitor, right?
Yeah.
Like this is the actual defense we have, is that an LLM will make smart decisions about things. Like I'm sure there are a lot of places where like good smart decision making is like a good triage step or whatever. But like literally as an access control mechanism, kind of like doesn't seem right to me.
Well, the problem they are trying to solve, I think, in many cases, is that you now have agents on the attack side, right? So, and they can move very, very quickly, like, compromise to persistence to lateral movement in, 30 seconds, right? And they can do it at any time. And so you kind of need human-like reasoning about what's happening in the enterprise and autonomous decision-making on timescales that are just fundamentally incompatible with human workflows, unless you fundamentally rethink how companies are structured and built, and you compartmentalize everything a lot better than we are compartmentalizing today. So I think on some level, LLM type reasoning is unavoidable on the defense side if you want that real-time, clever countermeasures, but it's incredibly difficult to get this right and not shoot yourself in the foot.
Yep.
So yeah.
It wouldn't be my first move as a defender. That wouldn't be like the first place.
Oh yeah. I think you need a lot of piping before you even get there, right? Like it needs to have the right sources of information to begin with, and most enterprises don't even have that, right?
Let me ask you a weird question. So you've got the book, and I'm going to ask you about the book, and it's the new book in a second, right? But how security are you going to be going forward? Are you going to veer off into circuit land?
No. So electronics has been my passion ever since, and I think it kind of like I ended up doing computer security kind of by accident. Computers, like I was either gonna become an electrical engineer or a chemical engineer, and that was sort of my childhood thing. And then computers showed up and ruined my life, right? And it was sort of the right time, the right place, right, to be getting into InfoSec.
I feel like that could be said of all of us, and then computers showed up and ruined my life.
Right. Yeah. So I think so obviously no real regrets about that. But yeah, I keep going back to that. And here's the thing, like I'm still very passionate about security, and I think again, like this is incredibly interesting, right? Like this is either the most interesting time in the history of InfoSec or the second most interesting after the arrival of the web, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
I was not nearly as excited about the field for a good while, right? So I want to be a part of it. At the same time, I think, the things that make you visible in the field, like basically punditry, I guess having a TikTok now, right? Or a podcast.
Or
and
podcast hosts,
or like doing vulnerability research work. I think I've done this long enough that it feels kind of, when you look back at it, it feels kind of futile, right? Like I did 2 security books. They are basically completely obsolete at this point. All the hundreds of advisories and whatever that I published a decade, 2 decades ago, no one really remembers or cares about any of that. And it's not that I'm sort of I'm not seeking eternal fame, but I think it's kind of weird about InfoSec compared to almost anything. Like if you publish a book about electronics, yeah, it's going to be slightly outdated in 10 years and maybe badly outdated in 20, but it's sort of it's not as rapid, it's not as dramatic, right? If you're a woodworker and you build a stool for yourself, it's still going to be fine. Like you're still going to be able to look at it, maybe pass it on to your children.
No, like if you wrote like a comprehensive catalog of shop jigs in a woodworking book in like 1965, I would probably still be interested in reading that book.
So I think, I'm trying to balance, like, basically I looked at my, InfoSec legacy and thought to myself, oh my God, this is all like, this is worthless, right? Like there's, AFL is going to get forgotten before long as well. And I'm trying to, find ways to make a more durable difference before my time is up, right?
So the book, I'm looking at a cover with a woman holding a hot solder iron way too close to her face.
Yes.
Tell us more about the book.
Right.
What is the name of the book?
The Secret Life of Circuits.
Awesome.
Yeah. And
let me ask my first question is, will this book teach me how to solder? Because I am terrible at soldering.
It actually contains some, pretty useful tips, which is basically spend more money on a good soldering iron or good soldering iron, like a pencil shaped, versus the one that you hold like a toothbrush and is about as fine of a tool. And that really makes a difference. Yeah, so like there's plenty of books about electronics, but I think we have this weird two-track approach to teaching that discipline, right? Like there's the hobby track, which is where you basically tell people that circuits are like water pipes, and I guess a diode is like a check valve, and a transistor is God knows what, right? Like some sort of a plumbing abomination that you probably don't want in your home. And all of this is very seductive, but it's also kind of terribly wrong because, there are interactions between electrons and charges that are happening at macroscopic distances. Like, you have two wires and there's current flowing in one and a voltage appears in another one. And like, you can't really explain that with like, plumbing analogies, right? So all that stuff that they teach you basically has zero predictive power, and you struggle to build your own circuits down the line. It's kind of like watching, 3 blue, 1 brown videos on YouTube, and you're really impressed by how clearly it's all explained, and then you realize that you don't actually know how to apply any of that knowledge to any, practical problems. And then there's the second track, which is sort of, the college degree approach, right? Where you have a textbook that is more anatomically correct, but the way we teach electronics to students is we really front load the calculus. You're basically only learning truly punishing math for the first year and a change before you get to, like an LED or like whatever, right? And you use that as a foundation to streamline all the electronic theory down the line. But this means that, like college textbooks are basically completely inaccessible to hobbyists because no one is going to take a semester or two of calculus.
What's the level of what's the level of math I need for I know that you're doing a different track here, which is super, super interesting, right? You're trying to be like at least practically, theoretically rigorous about things without forcing me to like solve, partial differential equations. But like, what's the level of math rigor you think you need to bring into the college track normally? How far do you have to get in that sequence?
So are you asking about the way people normally teach it?
The way people normally teach it.
I think it goes pretty far. It's like, Laplace transforms and like complex number calculus and stuff like that, right? So it's not just like, the basics of here's the, rate of change or here's the sum over time, right? It's like far more punishing. And the thing that I don't have an EE degree, but I actually try to follow that path. And the thing that is really frustrating by the end of the day is that none of the calculus is really explained from first principles, right? Like you're given formulas for, this is how you calculate the rate of change of, this particular function. But it's like, it's just a rapid fire of formulas that you're going to forget if you're not applying it day to day, within like 6 months of and so, the approach I've been trying to take in the book is, so the problem, like the further problem with that is that all the electrical engineers are taught the theory in a specific way, and they kind of assume that the complexity is essential to the explanation, right? So if you go to Wikipedia or you go to Stack Exchange and you just want to understand why the formula for the reactance of a capacitor or the frequency response of a filter looks this way, the answer is, kid, like learn some calculus and come back, right? And I don't think you actually have to do that, right? Like for sine waves, you can do you can derive all of this from basic trigonometry, and it's going to take you a bit longer. And, there's going to be more triangles and circles that you have to draw. But you kind of just need middle school, early high school foundations to explain electronics. So I think, there's a distinction between essential complexity and the complexity that makes sense and is expedient in a college setting, but doesn't really make sense for hobbyists. And so I'm trying to aim for that middle ground. And it's been a wild ride and a lot of triangles and like almost 300 hand-drawn illustrations and diagrams. And
I haven't asked you specifically before, but like I get the sense that you have most of the math already. So it's like, is the work here going from like I can metabolize this stuff because I have, you know, like complex calculus and all that, right? To like translating it down, or like is this literally you trying to figure this out as you go?
No. So I think you like the answer, right? And you sort of start from that point. But it's actually sometimes when you force yourself to explain something simply, you realize, actually, do I really understand this? Like, why is it the way it is, and how do you convey that in a way that makes sense to a person who hasn't read the same books, right, and hasn't gone down the same rabbit holes? So it is a bit of both, I think. Like trying to explain is when you realize that you don't know certain things, and
yeah, for sure. How far are you into the book now? I saw like 420 pages. Have you written 420 pages?
Yeah, it's all done. It's like with the printer right now. So yeah, you can pre-order and get a free PDF today, and it's gonna be like the entire book, and then it's gonna ship in September, like physical copies. It's gonna be full color and hardcover, so like really, really fancy.
Will there be copies at the No Starch booth at DEF CON or Black Hat or whatever?
I would expect so.
Cool.
But like I'm not in charge of their marketing, but they usually bring all the new stuff.
It would be a funny role for you to take.
Yeah. They actually always try to rope me in. They ask, are you going to DEF CON or Black Hat or whatever? And my answer is always no, thank you. I went there like 20 years ago, and that was good enough.
Will it teach you how to calculate the equivalent resistance between two resistor nodes that are a night's move away in an infinite grid of ideal 1 ohm resistors?
So that's the thing, there's a lot of things that we teach to people just to torture them, I think, right?
Or in some cases to be hit by a bus in an XKCD comic.
Yeah, and I think, there's also a lot of things that we teach in a particular way for historical reasons, right? Like if you buy an electronics book, there's probably going to be a chapter about things like tunnel diodes that, no one has made commercially since the 70s, and you can, buy some Russian surplus on eBay, right? Like if you really want to. Or how to wind your own transformer or stuff like that. And the book is not going to be spent, or like, you usually start with NPN or BJT, like, bipolar junction transistors, which are kinda not exactly obsolete, but they are more complex than the more common and more modern field effect transistors, which is what you actually use everywhere, right? In digital circuits and power switching and so on. So I've been trying to step away from that as well, and like really focus on modern problem solving. And that means that if you want to build an oscillator, you're probably not going to be putting together individual transistors. You're going to get a microcontroller that costs like 50 cents and program it to output whatever waveform you want, right? And if you want to change the frequency or whatever, you can just upload new code. So I think there's a lot of stuff like that in the book, just trying to keep it practical and not torture people with math or theory just for the sake of it. It's just the things you really need, or the things you need to know to make sense of Wikipedia articles or college textbooks down the line if you really need to investigate a specific thing.
Well, that's very cool. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for telling us about the book. Thank you for letting us interrupt you while you talked about AI bug finding for like an hour before talking about your book. Cool. We appreciate it.
Okay, cool.
Thank you so much for this. This has been a very fun conversation.
Yes.
Even though I think that vulnerability research is going to matter more than you think it will. I am super psyched for the book, although I'm a late in life math student, so I'm actually psyched about the math parts of it. But still, I'm unbelievably terrible with electronics. And I did not realize I could download the whole book right now, which is awesome. So that is The Secret Life of Circuits. That is Michał Zalewski's get it at some point. New book. Everything else he's written. We used to give copies of The Tangled Web, which is your second book.
Yes, which I have right here off screen.
Yeah, exceptionally good writer, very fun to read. So yeah, look, thank you so much for doing this. We really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. And, after the Vulnpocalypse, I'm happy to come back onto the show, and you can tell me how wrong I was.
You're a prepper. That was your third book. Is about like preparing for the. It was about preparing for the Vulnpocalypse. So I'm sure you'll be ready. We'll come to your place because you'll have water stockpiled for us.
Yeah, I have an excavator, so
you don't actually have an excavator.
I have an excavator. I have a tractor. I'm all set.
You're buying all the equipment that 2-year-olds were really fascinated by. You have the means now to buy the real size pocket trucks.
Yeah, the trick is you publish a book to make it look legit, and then you can buy whatever.
Okay. Well, when the Vulnpocalypse comes, we're running to your compound. You already invited us. You can't take it back. Security, Cryptography, Whatever is a side project from Deirdre Connolly, Thomas Tachek, and David Adrian. Our editor is Nettie Smith. You can find the podcast online at SCW Pod and the hosts online at Durham Crustulum, at TQBF, and at David C. Adrian. You can buy merchandise at merch at securitycryptographywhatever.com. If you like what you're hearing or seeing, give us a 5-star review wherever you rate your favorite podcasts or videos. Thank you for listening.
I can't believe he has an excavator.